The Blizzard Sorcerer is my absolute favorite build in this game, and now it's infinitely better this season. As a disclaimer, this is not a build that you can level with. Let's talk about it. The first couple points of this build go into Firebolt, and this is one of the ones that you end up enchanting. This is not a variable because we gain so many benefits from burning damage. On the next part of the tree, the 3 that we need is Potent Warding, because every time we do cast Blizzard, we gain a lot of defensives. And then the only other point that I have in this part of the tree is 1 into Devastation, and this is just to unlock a cluster later on. The next tree is pretty standard for most Sorcerer builds. You do go Shimmering Flame Shield, Shimmering Teleport, Enhanced Ice Armor for some mana regen, 3 points in a Glass Cannon, 5 points in a Frost Nova because you want to be able to vulnerable as much as possible, and that's with the Mystical Frost Nova rune, and the 1 point into Elemental Attunement. I see in almost every Sorcerer build. I don't actually get this one, but I do it because everybody else does it, so I'm kind of a sheep in this regard. On the Conjuration skills, you get 1 point into Align just so you can get 3 into Mana Shield and Protection. These are great. Every time you use a cooldown or every time you use X amount of mana, you gain a barrier. This build benefits a lot from bonus damage while having a barrier, so both of these are very important. On the Mastery tab, by the way, Mastery skills now also count as core skills that may come into play later. We do only have 1 point into Blizzard, and then obviously we go Mage's Blizzard because we want them to last as long as possible. The longer the Blizzard is there, the more ice spikes are spawned. And then the few passives, we just have 1 into Inner Flames just so we can get to Devouring Blaze. You deal increased critical strike damage to burning enemies. Now, whether or not Blizzard itself can crit, it's all from your ice spikes, which can crit and benefit greatly from critical strike chance and critical strike damage. On the ultimate tree, there's a few points that I didn't allocate where most other guides say so, and that's 3 into Fiery Surge. So every time a burning enemy dies, I get a shitload of mana regen, and I actually really appreciate that because then I can spam Blizzard that much more. The other myriad of passives here are Permafrost, Icy Touch, Hoarfrost, and Frigid Breeze. And all 4 of these are super important because they increase the damage that you do in one way or another, and they also give you even more mana regen, which is what we were just talking about. And then, of course, my favorite skill in this game is Deep Freeze. That's kind of obvious, but Deep Freeze will reset all of your cooldowns every time you use it. It's also one of the only ways to apply burning with this build because it doesn't come from Blizzard and it doesn't come from ice spikes. Your only ways to apply burning, and I'm going to touch base on this even more as we go out through this video, is from Deep Freeze when it hits everything around you, and then from teleporting. The key passive that we use is Avalanche. It gives your skills a chance to make your next skill free, and since we're a Blizzard Sorcerer and it's kind of expensive, this is a very large deal. You'll notice the idea with this build is to cast as many Blizzards as possible because there's no cap to how many ice spikes can be spawning. And then for the enchantments, the 2 enchantments that I go for, like 1 is Firebolt because that has to happen for all of your burning benefits, but then your second enchantment slot can either be Flame Shield or Teleport. Now, Flame Shield is no longer a cheat death when it's enchanted, but it's still incredibly useful because it kind of notifies you when you've taken a lot of damage, because once you've taken, I think it's 100% of your maximum life, you pop it automatically and it doesn't trigger the cooldown, so you're kind of like, oh shit, I gotta pay attention, you know what I mean? But the other one is Mobility with Teleport. That makes your evade a teleport, which, just like your normal teleport, does trigger your burning damage, and this is going to be important when it comes to Tal Rasha's ring as well. The aspects for this build are very important because you literally cannot play a Blizzard Sorcerer without the 2 main ones, and that first one is going to be Glacial. Glacial is what gives us the ice spikes around the Blizzard, and then Frozen Tundra is the other one, and while Frozen Tundra itself adds something that's pretty cool to Deep Freeze, the more important thing is they increase the radius of your ice spikes by 50%. A couple of the other ones that you want is Storm Swell. This is going to give you more vulnerable damage when you have a barrier. Conceited is going to give you more bonus damage just in general when you have a barrier. And then Control is going to give you more damage to crowd control targets, which surprisingly enough on a cold build is literally all the time. As for defensives, one of the best ones is Snow Guards because it's going to give you % damage reduction while you're standing in your blizzards and whenever you leave your blizzards for a couple seconds. Disobedience is of course going to give you that bonus armor that everybody knows about already. And then Ever Living is going to give us even more damage reduction, and that's from vulnerable or crowd control enemies. And as we've learned, that's kind of always. Now for the stats in Season 4, everything is so much simpler. It's fantastic. Everybody can understand this, so the general public can actually play this game and not be confused because they have to jump on a trampoline and take a phone call to do bonus damage. Now for the stats that we're looking for on this build, it's definitely going to be Intelligence and Cooldown Reduction. Those are the main 2 that we want to look at without tempering or anything like that. And then when tempering, we absolutely want ice spike damage on everything that it can possibly go on. A couple other really important ones is critical strike chance and damage. Those come in super handy with ice spikes. And then of course mana so that we can spam a couple more blizzards. As for the defensive stats, cooldown reduction, again, again, I'm sure we already talked about that in the offensive part, but then armor, resistances, and then maximum life. Now, the Paragon board on this one is super neat because it double dips in bonus damage to burning enemies and also damage reduction from burning enemies. Now, keep in mind, you're not really playing this build unless you're in like the 60s or 70s or even 80s because it takes a little bit to find glacial and frozen tundra. But our starting board is going to look a little bit like this, and the glyph that we use in this one is Elementalist. It's going to give us bonus non-physical damage, but the more important part of this one is that it's basically another Tal Rasha's ring, because every time we do damage with any other element, we get a stacking damage buff per element. The second board is the Enchantment Master, and we are just using this one as a conduit to get to the ones beyond here, but the glyph that we're going to use here is Reinforced. The next board is Icefall, where we do take the legendary node, which is going to give us bonus damage to vulnerable, and then the glyph we use here is Control, which gives us even more bonus damage to crowd-controlled targets. The board after that is Burning Instinct, where we don't actually go Burning Instinct. It's, again, just another conduit to get to the next Paragon board, but the glyph that we're using here is Destruction, and this is going to give us a ton of critical strike damage. Next, we have Frigid Fate, which is going to give us even more vulnerable damage, but the glyph we have here is Stalagmite, arguably the most important glyph out of every glyph on the Blizzard Sorcerer, because believe it or not, it increases your ice spike damage, but it also gives you an ass load of critical strike chance. To the right of this board, we go Searing Heat, but only so we can use the glyph socket, and the glyph we're using here is Flame Feeder, and Flame Feeder is one of those burning benefits where we're going to do an ass load of extra damage to burning targets. And then the final board, north of Frigid Fate, is Ceaseless Conduit, and we actually only use this one to get the Exploit glyph, and the Exploit glyph is going to give us even more vulnerable damage. So when it comes to the Paragon boards, you can do really whatever the hell you want to do. This is just what I'm using to showcase my build. For some of the endgame gear, Tabalt's is a great pair of pants because it's going to give us bonus damage every time we become unstoppable and for a couple seconds after unstoppable, and it's also going to give us a ton of resource when we become unstoppable. Next up, there's Raiment of the Infinite. This one should be obvious on most Sorcerer builds. This one, I find it to be one of the more important ones because every time you teleport, you clump all the mobs together. So if you have a bunch of blizzards already popping ice spikes like crazy, you can just Raiment right onto them and call it a day. And then finally, we have Tal Rasha's Ring. Tal Rasha's Ring is very important, and it's also a little tricky because Blizzard does not proc your enchanted firebolt thing, so it doesn't cause burning damage. You actually gain the burning damage benefit from teleporting onto mobs or using Deep Freeze. So when you teleport onto mobs, you're doing lightning damage and applying burning right there, so that's 2 stacks, and then everything else that comes from Blizzard is your 3rd stack. So you always have 3 stacks of Tal Rasha's, like, at all times. The playstyle for this build is actually super fun, and it's kind of a callback to the original Blizzard Sorcerer in Diablo 2. You throw down a bunch of blizzards and just kind of kite everything around in them. The damage does take a second to build up because the ice spikes don't spawn right away. It takes about 1.5 seconds for them to start popping, but it is pretty simple, and one of the key points to this one is every time you use any of your cooldown, because of the passives that we have in our skill tree, you gain a barrier. And remember, this build has a ton of extra damage while having a barrier, and so you can kind of cycle through the ones that you currently have, and then your ultimate you can use defensively or offensively or as just a cooldown reset, because whenever you use your ultimate, all of your cooldowns are reset. Now, objectively speaking, this build has amazing AoE damage, it does amazing when it comes to bosses, and it actually has really good survivability. It's kind of great all around. Is it the absolute best at any of those things? Not really, but it's pretty damn close. I put this up on the Pit Clapometer unoptimized, and it actually scored a bone-chilling 3 minutes and 21 seconds. And as of right now, that puts it in 2nd place compared to all the builds that we have on the chart so far. Now, my opinion on this build is rather biased. It's my absolute favorite build in the game. I play this every single season. I've never felt it be this powerful before because of all the tempering that you can do and increasing your ice spike damage through the goddamn roof. Now, for a rating, like I said, I am a little biased to this one. This is the only build so far that I'm actually going to give a perfect 10 to. Now, that begs the obvious question, what the fuck are you playing this season in Diablo 4? You'll have to let me know in the comments down below, and on the way down there, maybe like and subscribe because they're both free and they super help out the channel here. That's right, they super help us out here. What is wrong with me? Now, keep in mind, I do stream once in a while here on YouTube, so if you want to stay keen on that or join in whenever the fun is happening, then you'll have to join our Discord and pay attention to the announcements tab in there, because we do actually have a lot of planned events that we do. So we'll carry people's alts, or we'll run Ubers for you. I'll power level somebody. We'll be doing giveaways, whether it's gold giveaways or elixirs or Uber mats or whatever it is. It's a good time. I would highly recommend it. But hey, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you're bored, YouTube's gonna recommend this next one for you. Happy grinding, travelers, and we'll see you in Sanctuary.